The dining hall of the interstellar station was quiet except for the faint hum of the ventilation. Rian moved between the tables with a tray in his hand, placing drinks for tired travelers and cleaning up the remains of hurried meals. He was just a waiter, unnoticed by most, but he took pride in making sure no one left his section without at least a small smile. Tonight, however, something felt different. The air was tense, as if the whole station was holding its breath. He noticed her in the far corner, sitting alone. Her clothes were worn, her hands trembling as she tried to hold a steaming cup. Her eyes were sharp yet tired, scanning the room as if searching for danger. Rian had seen many faces in his job, but hers stood out. She looked like someone who had lost too much and carried the weight alone. Quietly, he approached her table, placing a small plate of fresh bread beside her drink without being asked. "It's on the house," he said with a gentle smile. Her gaze flicked to him, surprised, almost suspicious, but then softened. She nodded slowly, murmuring a quiet thanks. Rian didn't press for conversation. He simply gave her space, sensing she wasn't used to kindness anymore. But when he turned to leave, he noticed something, a faint mark glowing under the skin of her wrist, partially hidden by her sleeve. He recognized it instantly. That mark belonged to fugitives wanted by the Empire. The logical thing would have been to alert security. A fugitive meant trouble, and trouble could cost him his job. But something about her stopped him. Maybe it was the way her fingers clutched the bread, as if it were the first real food she'd had in days. Maybe it was a silent plea in her eyes. Whatever it was, Rian walked away without saying a word to anyone. Later that night, as he wiped down the last table, the sound of shouting echoed from the corridor outside. Boots pounded against the metal floor. He peeked through the kitchen door and saw armed Imperial soldiers moving quickly, scanning every passerby. In the middle of the chaos, the woman from earlier slipped through a side hallway, her eyes locking with his for just a second. She didn't speak, but her expression said enough. She needed help. Rian didn't think. He simply moved. He opened the service hatch behind the kitchen, motioning for her to follow. She hesitated for a moment, then slipped inside. The narrow passage smelled of oil and steam, pipes hissing in the dim light. He guided her deeper, away from the noise. When they finally stopped in a small storage room, she leaned against the wall, breathing hard. For the first time, she spoke clearly. "You don't know what you've done for me," she said, her voice low but steady. "This will change everything." Rian didn't understand what she meant. He was just a waiter, and this was just an act of kindness. But as the distant echoes of soldiers searching grew fainter, he realized something unsettling. Whatever trouble she carried, he was now a part of it, and there was no going back. The storage room was dim and smelled faintly of metal. The woman stayed near the wall, her breathing still uneven. Rian stood in front of the door, listening for any sound of soldiers. The hallway outside was quiet now, but he knew they weren't far. The Empire never gave up so easily. "Who are you?" he asked in a low voice. She studied him for a moment, then shook her head. "Not here," she replied. "If they find me, they will kill anyone near me." Her words were calm, but her eyes were sharp with fear. Rian knew that fear well. He had seen it on refugees who came to the station after losing their homes. She pulled something from her coat, a small metallic cube with faint blue light pulsing at its center. She held it out for him to see. "This is why they're hunting me," she said. "It holds the names of every rebel cell in 3 star systems. If they get it, the resistance dies." Rian stared at the cube, realizing that this was far bigger than helping a stranger find safety for the night. "You should give it to someone who can protect you," he said, his voice steady. She shook her head again. "I was supposed to meet that person here. They never arrived. Now it's just me and you." The weight of her words settled on him. He was still just a waiter, yet now he stood between the Empire and something that could change the fate of worlds. A sharp noise outside made both of them freeze. Heavy footsteps were approaching. Rian quickly motioned for her to follow. He led her through another service corridor that connected the back entrance of the station's waste management sector. Few people came here, and the air was damp and cold. The sound of boots grew louder, echoing through the narrow metal walls. They reached a grated floor above a massive chute, where steam hissed from below. Rian looked over the edge and then back at her. "We can climb down." They won't follow into the lower levels without a full team. She nodded, gripping the cube tightly before starting down the ladder. The metal was slick, and every movement sent a faint clanging sound into the dark below. When they reached the bottom, the air was heavy and warm. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping condensation. The woman stayed close to him, her footsteps light, but quick. Somewhere in the distance, a loud clang echoed, followed by muffled voices. The soldiers were spreading their search wider. Rian's chest tightened. This was no longer about whether he wanted to help. He had already chosen his side. They moved deeper until they reached a small hatch that opened into a maintenance shaft. Rian pushed it open and gestured for her to crawl inside first. She gave him one last look, as if trying to decide whether she could trust him completely. Then she went through, vanishing into the shadows. Rian followed, pulling the hatch shut behind him. The space inside was narrow and dark, the only light coming from the faint blue glow of the cube in her hands. As they crawled forward, Rian realized he didn't even know her name. But names didn't matter now. What mattered was staying alive long enough to see where this path would lead them. The maintenance shaft stretched ahead like a narrow tunnel, lined with pipes that rattled whenever the station's engine shifted. The air was thick, carrying the scent of oil and heat. Rian kept his hands close to the metal floor, following the faint glow from the cube in the woman's grip. Every sound felt louder here, every movement echoing around them. They reached a point where the shaft split into two paths. She hesitated, glancing at him. Left leads to the docking bays, she whispered. Right goes to the lower water reserves. Which way will be safer? Rian thought quickly. The docking bays would be crawling with soldiers by now. The water reserve were deep in the station's underbelly, far from the usual patrols. He pointed to the right. As they crawled forward, the temperature dropped. A thin mist curled around their hands and faces. Somewhere in the distance, a deep, slow drip echoed against the walls. The woman's breathing was steady now, but he could sense the weight of her urgency. She was trusting him to lead them somewhere the Empire couldn't reach, and he had no plan beyond staying one step ahead. They emerged into a small chamber where a single round hatch was set into the floor. Rust streaked the edges and faint condensation dripped from the ceiling. Rian turned the wheel slowly until it loosened. The hatch swung open to reveal a ladder disappearing into darkness. The woman looked at him once more, then started climbing down without a word. Rian followed, his boots clanging softly against the rungs. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Finally, they reached the bottom, a vast space filled with the sound of rushing water. Massive storage tanks loomed above them, connected by walkways and catwalks. The lighting here was faint, casting long shadows across the metal walls. This is far from any main routes, Rian said quietly. She nodded, glancing around. We can rest here for a moment. They won't search this deep unless they suspect we came this way. She leaned against a railing, clutching the cube as if it were her lifeline. Rian finally asked, "What's your name?" She hesitated, then answered, "Kara." Before he could respond, a sharp noise echoed through the chamber. Not the steady drip of water. This was sharper, metallic, deliberate. Rian's head snapped toward the sound. High above, a faint beam of light swept across the upper walkways. A shadow moved, quick and purposeful. Kara tensed, hiding the cube in her coat. Rian gestured for her to stay low. He moved toward the nearest column, pressing his back to it as the beam of light drifted closer. Voices followed, 2, maybe 3 soldiers, speaking in clipped tones. They were searching methodically, moving along the metal grates above. Rian scanned for another way out. On the far side of the chamber, he spotted a narrow maintenance stairwell leading up into the dark. He signaled to Kara. She understood instantly, and together they began moving silently across the lower platform, timing their steps with the rush of water to mask their movements. The soldiers' light swept just behind them, barely missing their silhouettes. Every muscle in Rian's body was tense. He wasn't just running from danger anymore. He was running towards something he didn't yet understand. The metal of the lower platform vibrated faintly under their steps. Rian kept his eyes on the narrow stairwell ahead while Kara stayed close, her movements quick but quiet. Above them, the soldiers' lights moved in slow arcs, cutting through the dim mist that drifted in the chamber. One wrong step, and they would be seen. They reached the base of the stairwell and began to climb. Each step groaned under their weight, and the sound seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Rian's hand gripped the railing tightly, his knuckles pale. Kara glanced upward, scanning for any movement. The higher they went, the stronger the hum of machinery became, as if they were moving closer to the station's heart. Halfway up, a sudden clang echoed from below. A soldier had jumped down onto the lower platform, his flashlight beam cutting across the metal floor. Rian froze for an instant, then motioned for Kara to move faster. She obeyed, her boots clanging softly against the metal steps. The light below swept upward, catching the edge of the stairwell. Voices rose in urgency. They reached a small landing with 2 doors. One was sealed with an access panel. The other hung slightly ajar. Without hesitation, Rian pushed the second door open and ushered Kara inside. The space beyond was cramped, filled with crates and containers stacked to the ceiling. The smell of old machinery and dust filled the air. Rian shut the door softly and crouched behind a row of metal cases. Through a thin gap in the wall panels, he could see shadows moving past. The soldiers were closing in, their boots striking the metal floor with measured force. Kara stayed low beside him, her hand clutching the cube so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her breathing was steady, but her eyes were locked on the narrow view of the hallway outside. A soldier's voice came through the wall. "Check every room. If she's here, the human won't be far." The word sent a sharp jolt through Rian. They knew she wasn't alone now. Staying hidden wouldn't be enough. They needed to move before the search reached their door. Rian scanned the room quickly. In the far corner, a ventilation hatch sat half hidden behind a stack of smaller crates. He pointed toward it. Kara understood immediately. They moved together, lifting the crates just enough to squeeze through. The hatch opened with a quiet creak, revealing a narrow duct coated in dust. Kara slid in first, then Rian followed, pulling the cover shut behind them. The duct was tight, forcing them to crawl on their elbows. The sound of the soldiers faded slightly, replaced by the dull thrum of the station's engines. The faint blue glow from the cube lit their path. Rian's mind raced. He had no idea where the duct would lead, but anywhere away from armed patrols was better than staying still. After several minutes of crawling, they reached a grate that looked down onto a large chamber below. Rows of computers and glowing screens lined the walls, and uniformed engineers moved between them. Kara's eyes widened. "This is a comms relay hub," she whispered. "If I can get to one of those terminals, I can send the data to the resistance right now." Rian studied the room below through the grate. The comms relay hub was busy, with engineers focused on their screens, typing commands and monitoring transmissions. None of them looked armed, but uniformed security stood at both exits. If they were caught here, there would be no chance to explain their way out. Kara pressed her hand lightly against his arm. "We have to get in," she whispered. "Once the data is transmitted, the Empire can't erase it." Her tone left no room for doubt. She was ready to risk everything. Rian looked at the guards again, then back at her. "We'll need a distraction," he said, quietly. They backed away from the grate and crawled further down the duct until they found another vent opening into a storage closet. Rian kicked it gently, and the metal cover fell inward with a soft clang. They dropped into the closet, landing between shelves stacked with spare parts and sealed containers. The hum of the machinery outside was louder here, a constant reminder of the heart of the station at work. Rian scanned the shelves and spotted a crate of coolant canisters. An idea formed quickly. He twisted one open just enough for the liquid inside to hiss and evaporate. The sharp, cold mist began to fill the small space. "When they smell this, they'll think there's a leak," he said. Kara nodded and stepped back as he set the canister near the door. He cracked the door open slightly. The hallway beyond was empty. Rian placed the canister just outside and tipped it over. The mist spilled out, curling along the floor and drifting toward the relay hub entrance. Within seconds, shouts came from the guards. They moved toward the source of the vapor, calling for engineers to check the pipes. The distraction had worked. Kara slipped out first, moving quickly toward the hub's open door. Rian followed close behind, keeping his head down. Inside, the engineers were focused on their screens, too busy to notice 2 strangers entering. Kara headed for an unoccupied terminal near the back wall. She sat down and began typing rapidly, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Rian stood behind her, scanning the room for any sign of returning guards. The hum of machines mixed with the soft clicks of her typing. A progress bar filled slowly on the screen, marking the transmission of the cube's data. Every second felt like a countdown to disaster. Kara's jaw was tight, her eyes fixed on the numbers climbing toward completion. A voice shouted from the hallway. The guard were coming back. Rian's pulse quickened. He moved to the door and spotted them pushing through the mist, weapons drawn. "Kara, now," he urged. She pressed one final command, and the screen flashed confirmation. The data had been sent. She ejected the cube and slipped it into her coat. The guards burst into the hub, demanding identification. Engineers froze, startled by the sudden intrusion. Rian grabbed Kara's hand and pulled her toward the far side of the room, where a service door stood half hidden behind equipment. They pushed through it just as the guards shouted for them to stop. The service door slammed shut behind them, and they found themselves in a narrow corridor lined with exposed pipes and flickering lights. The air was warmer here, heavy with the scent of hot metal. Rian led the way, moving quickly but keeping his steps quiet. Kara followed close, one hand inside her coat to keep the cube secure. From behind the door came the muffled shouts of the guards. Their boots clanged against the metal floor as they began pursuit. Rian spotted a branching hallway ahead and took the left turn without hesitation. The walls here were painted with faded safety markings, warning of high-pressure systems. It was the kind of place most civilians avoided, but it might be their best chance to lose the soldiers. They reached a grated walkway suspended over a vast chasm of machinery. The roar of the station's power core filled the air, drowning out nearly all other sounds. Heat radiated upward, and the faint vibration of massive turbines shook the floor under their feet. Kara's eyes darted downward, but she stayed focused on keeping pace. Halfway across, a loud metallic thud rang out from the walkway behind them. A guard had entered the platform, weapon raised. Rian didn't hesitate. He grabbed a loose metal bar from the side railing and swung it in a wide arc. The clang echoed as it struck the guard's weapon, sending it clattering into the depths below. The guard stumbled but shouted into his communicator, alerting others to their position. Rian dropped the bar and pulled Kara forward. They reached the far end of the walkway and pushed through another door, emerging into a dim maintenance control room. Screens flickered with streams of data, and warning lights flashed in rhythmic patterns. "Where now?" Kara asked, her voice tight with urgency. Rian scanned the displays until one caught his attention, a schematic showing an emergency escape tunnel leading to the station's outer ring. He pointed to a hatch on the far wall. "That's our way out," he said. Kara hurried toward it, while Rian pulled a heavy lever beside the hatch. The metal door hissed open, revealing a sloping passage lit by faint red lights. The tunnel was just wide enough for them to run side by side. They sprinted down the slope, the sound of distant boots still following, but growing fainter under the pounding of their own steps. The tunnel twisted sharply before opening into a large airlock chamber. A small transport pod sat in the center, its surface worn but intact. Kara approached the controls and began activating the startup sequence. The airlock door behind them rattled as someone tried to override it. Rian stepped between Kara and the door, gripping a nearby length of reinforced pipe. His heart pounded, but his stance was steady. "Hurry!" he called over his shoulder. Kara's fingers danced over the controls, and the pod systems came online with a low hum. The airlock door burst open, and two guards rushed in. Rian swung the pipe, forcing them back just long enough for Kara to open the pod's hatch. He jumped inside after her, sealing the door as the pod disengaged from the station's clamps. With a deep mechanical rumble, they launched into the void beyond. The pod shot through the darkness, its engines humming steadily as the station shrank in the distance. Rian sat in the co-pilot seat, his eyes scanning the controls while Kara navigated with practiced focus. Stars streaked past a viewing window, but his attention stayed fixed on the scanner. A single red blip appeared behind them, moving fast. "They're chasing us," he said. Kara didn't look up, her hands working quickly over the controls. "One patrol craft, faster than us, but lightly armed." Her voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it. She knew they had little time before the enemy closed the gap. Rian leaned forward, searching for any way to outmaneuver their pursuer. The pod wasn't built for combat. Its small size and thin armor meant a direct hit would tear through them. Rian spotted a cluster of asteroid ahead, tumbling slowly through space. If we can weave through them, they might lose us, he suggested. Kara gave a short nod and adjusted their heading toward the jagged rocks. The hum of the engines deepened as the pod accelerated. They entered the asteroid field, sharp shadows sliding across the hull as massive stones drifted past. Kara's movements were precise, guiding them through narrow gaps with only meters to spare. Behind them, the patrol craft followed, its weapons charging. A bright flash lit the darkness as the first shot flew wide, striking a nearby asteroid and shattering it into spinning fragments. Rian gripped the side panel, his gaze fixed on the scanner. The patrol craft was still gaining. "They won't stop," he said, his voice low. Kara's eyes narrowed. "Then we make them stop." She reached under her seat and pulled out a small device, a shaped charge no bigger than her palm. She handed it to him. "Magnetize us to one of the larger asteroids when we pass close enough. Time it right, and the blast will block their path." They spotted their chance moments later. A massive asteroid loomed ahead, rotating slowly. Kara steered them within arm's reach of its surface, and Rian opened a side hatch just enough to lean out. The cold of space bed his skin as he pressed the device against the rock's rough surface. The magnet locked it in place, and he pulled the hatch shut. Kara counted down the seconds under her breath. The patrol craft appeared on the scanner, moving into the same gap they had just passed through. "Now," she said. Rian hit the trigger. A burst of light flared behind them, and the asteroid fractured violently, sending debris scattering in every direction. The patrol craft swerved, but couldn't avoid the wave of fragments. The scanner blinked once, then the red blip vanished. Kara slowed the pod, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "It's over," she said. Rian leaned back, finally allowing himself a breath. The cube was safe, the data sent, and the Empire's grip had loosened, if only slightly. Kara turned to him, her expression softer now. "You didn't have to help me," she said. "But you did. And now you're part of something far bigger than you realize." Rian met her gaze and gave a small nod. He didn't know where their path would lead next, but he knew this was no longer just a fight. It was theirs.